I'm honestly shocked that I'm doing another mock draft this quickly, but Pronman and Byron Bader both dropped their top 32 rankings just last week, and it has thrown my consensus mock draft completely out of whack. So today, let's go through what the new consensus board looks like and some of the trends that are starting to emerge. Now I'm going to speed run through the early picks because they have not changed. Matthew Schaefer is still projected to go number 1 overall to the Islanders. Only one draft has him not going number 1, and that draft has him going at number 2. So I remain very confident that he will be an Islander unless they trade that pick. At pick number 2, Michael Meester remains the front runner to go there to the San Jose Sharks. He is the consensus best forward in the draft, and if he doesn't go here at pick number 2, he will assuredly be snapped up at number 3 by the Blackhawks, but the consensus has them taking James Higgins at number 3 overall. There's noise that James Higgins could be falling down some draft boards and making room for guys like Caleb Denoyer, Porter Martone, and Anton Frendel, but the absolute lowest I've seen Higgins go in a mock draft is number 8 overall, so he's definitely a consensus top 10 pick, and there's just so much diversity of opinion in terms of the other forwards that he edges out the other guys to be the consensus number 3 pick. But I will say there's a considerable gap between him and Michael Meester now, and there's not a huge gap between him and the number 4 overall pick, which the consensus has the Utah Mammoth taking Porter Martone in this spot, which is again unchanged from the last 2 consensus mocks. At number 5 to the Predators, we have Caleb Denoyer going, which is a slight change from the previous 2 consensus mocks that had him going number 6 overall. So Denoyer is moving up draft boards just slightly, but it's not a huge jump. The biggest change, honestly, is that the floor of where he could go, the lowest, is now number 8 overall. Previously, there were some mocks that had him going outside of the top 10. That's no longer the case. And in his previous spot, number 6 overall, the Flyers are now taking Anton Frendel, who was previously going number 5. So these 2 players just flip-flopped in their rankings from the last consensus mock. And similarly, the next 2 players also flip-flopped in their rankings. Now we have at pick number 7 to the Bruins, Jacob Bryan is projected, whereas before it was Victor Eklund projected to go in this spot. Now Eklund goes where O'Brien was going, pick number 8 to the Seattle Kraken. Not a huge change between the 2, but I will say that there is a widening of the gap between these 2 players and the top 6, which ends with guys like Martone, Denoyer, and Frendel. So this is really where we're sort of getting into the second tier of prospects, where it's not necessarily a strong consensus that these 2 guys are top 10 picks from every mock draft that I've seen. Then at pick number 9, one of the biggest risers of the past few mock drafts, Brady Martin is now projected to go here to the Buffalo Sabres, whereas before he was not projected to be a top 10 pick in my previous 2 consensus mocks. There is still a wide divergence of opinion on him. There are some mocks that have him going outside the top 15, but there are considerably more that have him as a top 10 pick, and even one that has him as a top 5 pick. His stock has been flying upward over the last few weeks, so I'll be very interested to see where Brady Martin actually ends up going. Jackson Smith is then projected to go at pick 10 to the Ducks, which is not surprising. This is a round where he's been mocked consistently, 10 or 11. But the next player mocked at number 11 to the Pittsburgh Penguins is the huge surprise, a big dropper over the past few weeks, which is Roger McQueen. Once considered to be a pretty safe consensus top 5 pick, McQueen is now no longer projected to go in the top 10, and in fact only 3 of the mocks that I've seen have him in the top 10 at all. Really a surprising development to me because I like McQueen a lot, but it seems to signal that teams are starting to prioritize size among their forwards rather than speedy, skilled players. And another surprise follows him as Radim Murka is projected at number 12 to the Rangers, a guy who was again projected to be very solidly a top 10 pick for a defenseman. He's been slipping little by little over the past few mocks, but I will say he's still very much considered to be one of the tier 2 prospects. It's just now he is at the bottom of that tier, because there is a considerable gap after Radim Murka to the next tier of players, which is kicked off by Lyndon Blakovic, whose ranking hasn't really changed. 13 to the Red Wings is about where I've usually mocked him here, or 14 to 15, and ditto for Justin Carbonneau, who has been right in that 16 to 14 range over my previous consensus mocks. Kashawn Atchison at number 15 overall is actually one of the few guys outside the top 5 whose ranking has not changed over my previous 3 consensus mocks. He's always gone 15 to the Canucks, which isn't really that meaningful. It's just a funny coincidence. Robert at 16 hasn't moved from the last consensus mock, but then at 17 we have another big surprise riser in Cole Resny, who previously was projected to go in the late 20s in my first consensus mock, but has risen up considerably to now being considered a borderline top 15 pick. Now the range and the spread of opinion on him is pretty wide, so he could go anywhere from the top 15 to the end of the first round still, but the consensus right now has him going at pick 17. Braden Coots is then projected to go at 18 to the Flames. This is about where he's been mocked previously, and ditto for Malcolm Spence, projected to go at pick 19 to the St. Louis Blues. However, Spence is the line of demarcation between that sort of tier 3 of prospect and the tier 4 of the first round, because Spence is rarely mocked to go in the top 15 and is very consistently mocked outside of the top 20, even though he's projected to go at 19 here. Following him in that tier 4 is Cameron Reed at pick 20. This is the highest he's ever been mocked, but it's not an abnormality or a pattern. He's been consistently an early 20s pick. But Logan Henson Hensler has been moving downboards consistently over the last few mocks, but the consensus on him is very, very spread. There are still a bunch of mocks that have him going in the early teens and a few more that have him going in the late 20s. At 22 to the Flames, they're still projected to take Ben Kindle. And after him, we have the most polarizing player in the entire draft. Because you know how I said that Resny had a huge spread of opinion on him? Well, Colin Potter's might be even bigger. There are drafts that have him going in the top 10 and some that don't even have a first round grade on him. Census slots him right here to pick 23, but honestly, this is the wild card of the entire first round. Colin Potter could end up going almost anywhere in the first round, and it would not surprise me. At 24, we have Blake Fiddler. That's about where he is being mocked, and there's also a high degree of consensus on him that he is a early to mid 20s player. Bill Zonin at 25, another guy who's been creeping up some draft boards. Previously, he was barely a top 30 pick. Now it seems like there's a pretty clear consensus that he will be a first rounder. And the case is the same for Sacha Boumedienne, who might have the strongest agreement among mock drafts of where he should go, which is in this 23 to 29 range. But he was previously thought to be a borderline first rounder. I think now I would be surprised if he doesn't end up going in the late first. Joshua Ravensbergen, then projected to go at 27. This is a bit of a wild card for me too, just because he's a goalie. And while there are a bunch of mocks that don't even have him going in their first round, I could see him going even earlier if some goalie-hungry team feels like they need to grab him in the mid-teens or early 20s. Jack Nesbitt, he has bounced around a lot in terms of consensus on him, but he is still projected to go in the late first round as he has been in the previous mocks. And then for these last 4 spots, I'm less confident that the guys I'm picking here will actually go in the first round. They could easily end up going higher, but right now I've slotted in Cameron Schmidt at 29 and Gastrin at 31. I have taking Ivan Ryabkin, then rounding it out at pick number 32, Jack Murtaugh. As you can see, some big moves in the consensus. Guys like Brady Martin and Cole Resny flying up the boards as we get closer to the draft, while guys like McQueen, Mertka, and Hensler are slipping a little bit. It's going to be very interesting to see how it all shakes out on draft night.